program. My name is Darlene Chu Bryant. I'm the Executive Director of GlobalSF here in San Francisco. I'm here to welcome you to today's webinar on connecting the dots on EV, electric vehicles, and sustainability. In partnership with OneLin and the Silicon Valley Liaison Office for the City of Guangzhou, we're here to say that San Francisco, the center of innovation, is open for business. A little bit about GlobalSF. We are an economic development organization established as a nonprofit organization that promotes economic and trade development opportunities between the city of San Francisco and China. And today we are focused on Guangzhou because there is a Greater Bay Area initiative and everybody is looking to what is happening here in San Francisco, again, the center of innovation. Since 2008, China SF was established as a public-private partnership between the city of San Francisco, with the city of San Francisco, and our focus was on the bilateral relations between China and San Francisco. Today, we not only support the city of San Francisco, but work closely with the state of California and enjoy our role in connecting dots all over the world with the Center of Innovation being here. And on to today's program. I am delighted and grateful to have our partner and representative, Mr. Mark Chandler, Director of International Affairs for the City and County of San Francisco here. And I'd like to bring Mark up so that he can give a few welcome remarks. Mark.
Well, thank you very much, Darlene. And my greetings to all who are out there, especially my good friends that are in Guangzhou and Guangdong. And I'd like to direct many of my comments to our good friends in China. I'm not an EV expert. Those are coming soon, and we have an amazing lineup of EV experts and people involved in this sector that you're going to hear from. But I am an expert in international relations, and I'm an expert in the city of San Francisco and our friendship abroad. So first, I'd like to thank GlobalSF for putting this amazing forum together today, and for the companies and organizations that have partnered with GlobalSF to make this presentation. It's an honor on behalf of our mayor, London Breed, and the city and county of San Francisco to welcome all who are part of this forum, and to hope that you have a very enjoyable and most importantly, interesting hour and a half as we delve into this very, very important subject. To those of you who are in Guangdong and Guangzhou and in China, I want to say two things before we move on. The first is there is no city, no region, no state in the United States that is more deeply involved with the proliferation of electric vehicles and zero emission vehicles than San Francisco, the San Francisco Bay Area, and California. This is the place where it's happening in our country. This is the place where you need to partner and be. San Francisco itself has about 10,000, we estimate, registered EVs in our city. That's out of a city of about 900,000 people. We have almost 1,000 public charging stations today. According to the International Council on Clean Transport, our city ranks in the top for electric vehicle promotion, adoption, and charging infrastructures among all USA cities. Most importantly, our city has taken this seriously for many years. And just in 2019, we released, and you can't see this, but it is the it's the roadmap. Sorry, it doesn't work well in Zoom, but is the city's electric vehicle roadmap for San Francisco. It's a 45-page document that was put together by experts from every corner of our city and how we move our city forward to have many, many more EVs on the street. Some examples of what our city has done and has led the country are things such as our commercial garage requirement. Back in 2015, we passed a law that all commercial garages, parking garages in San Francisco, by the end of 2023 have to have at least 10% of their parking spaces with chargers. Our construction codes were changed at about the same time. So it doesn't matter if you're building a house, a residential process, a commercial process, or renovating a major building. We now have green building codes. And one of those codes is that you have to provide the infrastructure so that chargers, EV chargers, can be easily implemented in any new building construction. Internally, we have put a deadline of the end of next year, December 31, 2022, to have all of the fleet of light vehicles within the city government, those cars and light trucks that we use, to be zero emission vehicles, either electric vehicles or hydrogen vehicles. So I think you can see this is a city that's moving ahead very quickly in terms of adapting to the new world that we're going to see with electric vehicles. The second thing I'd say to our partners in China, why you should be at San Francisco, is there's no city that is more welcoming, more open, and more adept at working with Chinese organizations in San Francisco. GlobalSF and its twin China SF have been doing this for over 13 years, working with Chinese organizations as they come into the United States. Our city welcomes this. As a city government, we welcome you to San Francisco. We will work with you. We have a dedicated team of people in our economic development office who will work with you. And we also have the GlobalSF staff, Darlene's staff that will work with you. Secondly, our population is welcoming. Our population is diverse, it's Pacific oriented. A quarter of our citizens are Chinese Americans, so there's great cultural knowledge. And we have the most talented workforce in the world too. Most talented workforce, at least in the United States. And that is what you need when you're in new sectors like this. So if you come to San Francisco, you're going to find a welcoming city, both by its population and by its government. You're going to find a talented work group, a talented population of employees, many of whom are bilingual, bicultural, and so they can bridge that gap between us across the Pacific. And you're going to find a population that is very, very pro-environment, which is very, very interested in electric vehicles, and which are trendsetters to the United States and also have a high income. You put all that together, there's no city, there's no region, there's no state, I think, that is better suited to work with those who are advancing this electric vehicle sector, our zero emissions vehicle sector, than San Francisco, the San Francisco Bay Area, and California. So I just want to say welcome to everyone. I look forward to listening to our very esteemed panel of speakers after this. And I welcome all of you who are in Guangzhou and Guangdong to join us here in San Francisco. I wish everybody a very, very happy holiday season. And I'd just like to say again to Darlene and to all at GlobalSF and to the partners who are putting this together, thank you very much. We look forward to working with everyone here in San Francisco. Have a great day, or a great morning. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. You're always great to have as part of any program that we have. You're definitely our biggest and best ambassador. And with that, I'd like to now invite Ms. Judy Lee. She's the General Manager at Silicon Valley One Lin Capital Corporation to give a few welcoming remarks. Judy.
Thank you so much, Darlene. Good morning, good evening, everybody, depending on which time zone you're in. Yeah, as Darlene mentioned, I am the general manager of One Lin. And to give you a little bit background about One Lin is a family office backed by a 30+ year real estate conglomerate with offices in Silicon Valley, Seattle, and Asia. And we are very active investors across different asset classes and regions. And to echo Mark's point, one of the reasons why we are located here in the San Francisco Bay Area is because how global this area is and how we are able to connect with everybody around the world through this, this particular region. So, you know, we are very excited about today's topic because we think this topic of EV is a great representation of how US and China and San Francisco Bay Area and Guangzhou can really work together to push forward the latest and the greatest by sharing best practices. So One Lin is a sponsor of today's event, which is a start of the series of different events. And One Lin today also is helping to represent the city of Guangzhou, who is the co-host to kick off the event. And to add one point that Mark mentioned, you know, about how great this area is, there's one more thing I would like to add, which is that, you know, One Lin is also is a big investor in technology, and the Bay Area, the Silicon Valley, Sand Hill is the hub and the where all the VCs are located. And this is a great, one of the reasons why this area is able to be the driving force and be able to push forward all the startups and all the technology. It's because this is where all the greatest minds, not just the greatest minds are concentrated, but also the pool of resources, including investments, including funding, including just network and connections. So yeah, we're very excited to be able to work with GlobalSF and to kick off this series of events and to learn from all the panelists and experts on the EV industry and how San Francisco, how Guangzhou, how US and China is able to work together. Look forward to hearing from all of you.
Thank you so much, Judy, for your remarks. And to your point, yes, we definitely are the center where a lot of the deal flow does come through San Francisco. Just to reiterate that a lot of the venture capital, even Sand Hill Road, a lot of the companies and offices come to San Francisco proper to look for deal flow because they can no longer find a deal flow that they once could find down in the valley. So come here to San Francisco. But before I start the program, I just wanted to share with everyone that there is an opportunity for the public to send us questions for any of the panelists. Q&A, public Q&A does start after the panel discussion is over, and it'll probably be about 15 minutes till the end of the hour. But please enter any question you may have for any of the panelists in the Q&A section. Do not enter any questions into the chat section. Chat section could be comments that you make, or if you want to send something to any of our speakers directly as an FYI. But if you do have a question that you want to have answered during this program, please enter them into the Q&A. And with that, I'd like to start our program now by inviting Dr. Bruce Pickering, Senior Advisor on Policy for GlobalSF, to start moderating the discussion. Bruce.
Thank you, Darlene. It's an interesting period to be having this conversation. I'm delighted to have a role with so many interesting people from both sides of the Pacific. It's important to note that the topic of sustainable urban development is an area of profound interest for both the United States and China. And at a time when tensions run high on a range of issues, the topic of sustainable urbanization remains an area with great possibilities for future cooperation between the US, especially California, and China, including, of course, Guangdong Province and the City of Guangzhou. A key part of our conversation today is not just the topic of EVs, but also the creation of an ecosystem that supports electric vehicles, since they can't exist in a vacuum. In the United States, the state of California and the city of San Francisco, as you've heard from Mark Chandler, have led the way forward with innovative policies designed to encourage the adoption of EVs. Each of our speakers today has played a role in the creation of such an ecosystem, and it's a great chance to have a compare and contrast conversation. I'd like to start with Maureen Blanc. You've played a central role in the creation of such an ecosystem here, and I'm hoping you can give us a bit of background on how it emerged and where it's going to go.
Well, thank you to GlobalSF for hosting this important session, and thank you to Bruce Pickering for inviting me to join the panel. I'm Maureen Blanc. I'm the director of Charge Across Town. We're a California nonprofit that was founded here in San Francisco over 10 years ago under then Mayor Ed Lee and the Department of the Environment to help get San Francisco EV ready. We focus on the demand side of electric vehicles, working with people, the general public, to educate and raise awareness of the many economic and environmental benefits of driving an electric car. I have to say the past 10 years is now finally paying off as we see the rise in demand for EVs, as well as all the promises of electric vehicle fleets coming from the major automakers. But California's rise in electric vehicles can be attributed to the groundwork laid many decades ago. In the 1960s, California, in response to LA's smog problem, introduced and enforced stringent emission standards through the California Air Resources Board and the EPA. It established the first tailpipe emission standards in the nation. Under the Clean Air Act, we adopted, implemented, and enforced a wide array of nation-leading air pollution controls based on a strong foundation in science. California's fuel efficiency standards forced the auto industry to the table to get on board with cleaner cars. The low carbon fuel standard was designed to decrease the carbon intensity of California's transportation fuel and provide a range of low carbon and renewable energy alternatives, reducing petroleum dependence and achieving air quality benefits across the state. This year, California Governor Newsom declared that all new California cars and trucks must be zero emission by 2035. And as you know, California is the largest car market in the United States. Today, there are 2.2 million electric vehicles on the road in the US. California has 1 million. We've been almost half of the US market. And the reason we are is because California has brought the full package of ingredients to the table. Strong policy, innovation, which we've been hearing from everyone, strong entrepreneurship, universities, education, and of course, a strong venture capital ecosystem. I also want to say it's been a favorable business environment for startups. And we would be remiss without saying thank you to Tesla, who really has kicked off the California EV revolution. So today, California is poised to become a leading EV hub. We have companies like Karma, Byron, Rivian, Lucid, Faraday, Proterra, BYD, and of course, some of these are from China, as you well know. And of course, the many charging infrastructure players headquartered here. We're seeing EV-based autonomous car services in pilot mode also coming onto the market, Cruise, Waymo, and more. So California sees itself as the guardian of the EV charging galaxy. Our goals are now supported by all the major automakers, which took quite a while, but their commitments to making cars need to be met with certainty at the policy level. And charging infrastructure is a critical concern and something that needs to be ubiquitous across the state. And finally, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the strong commitment to environmental equity and justice in Sacramento, making sure that the most vulnerable communities, those with some of the worst air quality, are not left behind in the EV revolution. Through targeted policy, incentive programs, EV education and outreach, we believe there should be an EV for everyone, and that's what we've been working on. I'll stop there and turn it back over to Bruce.
Thank you very much. Lowell, I think you've had a lot to do with the implementation of such the policies and the stable policy environment that Maureen has mentioned is a critical part of this. And I'm wondering if you can give us a little bit of background, maybe a little more granular on the city of San Francisco and how it approaches this.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for the invitation, GlobalSF, to speak on behalf of the City and County of San Francisco Department of the Environment. Again, my name is Lowell Chu, and I'm the Energy Program Manager with the Department of the Environment. And part of my responsibility day to day is the implementation of the document that Mr. Chandler showed to you at his opening remark, which is the 2019 Citywide Electric Vehicle Roadmap. And to answer your Bruce, to answer your question about going into more details around the implementation of policy, well, all those policies and as well as some of the ordinances that Mr. Chandler mentioned were really informed by this document, Citywide Electric Vehicle Roadmap, because it basically lists 6 different strategies to get us to the future that Maureen was talking about, where there's an EV for everyone. So the 6 strategies, really generally speaking, are raising public awareness around the benefits of electric vehicle, why electric vehicle is not only better for the environment, but also better for you as a consumer because there's very little maintenance and the dollar per mile goes much longer. After public awareness, the roadmap really wants to elevate incentives. So that could be a rebate directly to the consumer. That could be a form of a tax credit. That could also be policies that are really friendly to drive investments, to spur investments in public charging in San Francisco. And I can talk a little bit more about that later. Relatedly to the charging infrastructure, we need to fortify our charging infrastructure to basically, again, to Maureen's point, there's the EV for everyone, but there's also a place to charge that EV for everyone, knowing that 2 out of 3 of our residents live in multi-unit dwelling that may not have a reserved parking spot at home. We need to have a really robust charging infrastructure to ensure those residents could choose an electric vehicle as their next vehicle purchase, not because they don't have charging infrastructure at home, but because there is a robust public charging infrastructure outside of their home. So to build that infrastructure, we need to have a stable grid. We need to have a grid that is reliable, stable, and affordable. So the rates at which electric vehicle are charged needs to be affordable to everyone. And we spent a lot of time in the Department of Environment thinking about the charging infrastructure and policies for light duty, but we're also very cognizant of medium heavy duty because we know medium heavy duty vehicles, the trucks, right? They pollute more than the light vehicle because of diesel particulate matter. So we're going to focus on that as our 5th strategy. And the last but not least, one of the reasons why we gather here today is talk about autonomous vehicle. Our last strategy in the roadmap is emerging mobility. How do we advocate for and encourage emerging mobility options to be clean, to be emission-free? So in summary, public awareness, incentives, building a charging infrastructure for everyone, having a stable, reliable grid, looking at electric trucks, and then focusing on autonomous vehicle and other emerging mobility options. It's what San Francisco Department of the Environment is really focused on. So Bruce, I'll turn it back to you. I hope that answers your question a little bit more fully.
Well, it just got the conversation started. So Iris, you obviously are representing an entirely different ecosystem. And one of the things that I'd love to tease out here are some of the areas where the Bay Area can learn and California can learn from China and vice versa. So you've heard a lot so far about San Francisco and California. Would you give us a bit of a background now on the sort of emergence of the EV market in China? That would be very interesting for us to know.
Yeah, I'd love to share more. So first of all, my name is Iris. I'm the Senior Business Development Manager at WeRide. WeRide is a global level 4 autonomous driving startup company. We are headquartered in Guangzhou, but we have operations in both California and also different cities in China as well. I'd love to answer your question, Bruce. So you were asking about the sort of the policy differences between China and also in California. So we're lucky enough to have experience in both the cities that we're going to discuss today. So just to share with you a little bit of our observations. So for example, we think that the China government has been really proactive in terms of launching or deploying the both EV and AV initiatives, especially when we talk about the city Guangzhou. For example, recently we know that Guangzhou has published a regulation or the policy about replacing 100% of the current fuel taxi vehicles with electrical vehicles by the end of 2022. So that's definitely some of the policy directly from the city government to implement the EV deployment. And also in terms of the AV implement, there are also some of the city-directed regulations to encourage the deployment. For example, Guangzhou is the first city ever in China to issue the truly driverless on-road testing lessons for the autonomous driving technology companies. And WeRide, of course, was the first one to get this truly driverless license. And on top of that, recently, just this year, the city government published a series of the regulations talking about mixing the autonomous vehicles with the regular human driver vehicles on the road. And the good thing about the city government policy is that they're taking a step-by-step approach. They're iterative, proactive, but at the same time, very conscious and thoughtful in terms of this public deployment. So they're implementing this mixed road regulations in one trial district, Huangpu district, and is aiming to expanding this mixed road regulations to all of the 11 districts by the end of this decade. So hope that answers some of the key interests that you were asking about the differences between the two areas.
One thing too, a quick question. So Tesla is really a product of a public-private partnership. It received a fairly decent subsidy from the U.S. government to enable it to take off. Is China doing the same thing with its electric vehicles?
Yes, that's a really good question. So, so we also, and I would like to focus more on Guangzhou city, because that's the city which we feel very hard with. Also, the city that we have WeRide headquartered in. Guangzhou, the city has been one of the city who has the largest subsidiaries in terms of the EV deployment in the general public. For example, I believe that in this recent 5 years, Guangzhou City, the government has been implementing the policy of subsidizing up to 10,000 Chinese dollars for any consumer who would like to replace their vehicles from the traditional fuel vehicles to the electrical vehicles. So this subsidy is definitely one of the best or the most generous subsidies among all the cities in China. But I believe that more and more cities are going to follow Guangzhou's initiatives and really take the initiatives to encourage the EV deployment.
Great, thank you. All right, so now we, this has been so far a discussion a bit about the regulatory and policy environment to make, EVs and to some degree autonomous vehicles possible. We have with us somebody who's really thoughtful and has done a lot of work in investing in this, Alfred Chu. Alfred, would you give us a little bit of the background? What do you find attractive? And as somebody who thinks a lot about trends and has to be there ahead of the game, what do you see emerging?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Bruce. I've been involved with the EV industry for over 10 years, and it's never been more exciting. We are experiencing exponential growth at this point. In 2012, we were a little over 100,000 EVs per year. It took about 5 more years, 2017, before we got to 1 million per year. And then a couple more years to get to 2 million. 2020, which was a record year, we had 3.2 million EVs. And this year, we're expecting 7 million EVs to be deployed this year. And so this is exciting that this trend is accelerating. We're on the steep part of the S curve. And the TAM is tremendous. There are roughly 90 million passenger vehicles produced every year globally. And that's comes out to be roughly a $2 trillion market. And so, many regions are estimating by 2030 or 2035 that close to 80, 90, 100% of these vehicles will become electric. So this is the largest industrial transformation in our lifetime. And as you well know, energy storage is the tip of the spear to make all other sustainable energy viable. And so this is a very exciting time. What I've been focused on is really cross-border learnings and collaboration opportunities between the US and China. And, US historically has been the source of battery innovation and policy innovation, right? So the lithium cell was created by John Goodenough in the 1980s, commercialized early in the 1990s by Sony. And there was a lot of innovations that came, therefore, from Argonne National Lab. So the NMC cells were created, LFP cells, and a lot of the technologies that are the base of what we see for EVs today we're standing on the shoulders of a lot of innovation that's happened in the US through great researchers and our national labs. And this continues, right? There's a lot more innovation on the roadmap. Certainly silicon anodes, from companies like Amprius, Oscilla, or solid state batteries from Argonne National Labs working on it, quantum skate, solid power, and a whole roadmap of things that a lot of innovation that's on the roadmap. And I think it's exciting because any of these technologies can be transformative to the whole industry. And so these are reasons why globally companies want to be involved in Silicon Valley and in the U.S. Have a hand in the U.S. Research innovation, because these are transformational technologies. And also, I think Maureen pointed out that U.S. has been early in terms of the creating policies, and China has emulated a lot of these policies. So a lot of these ZEV mandates that were created in the U.S., China has implemented them as NEV credits. And then California has created the CAFE standard, the corporate average fuel economy standard, and China has emulated that with the CAFC, the corporate average fuel consumption standards. So there's a lot of learnings that China has done, from sort of the U.S. policymakers. Now, U.S. also has a lot to learn from China at this point, because China has become the EV giant and industrial powerhouse. Right. So of these 7 million vehicles, roughly 3 million are being produced in China. And China's new vehicles are, 20% of China's vehicles have become EVs as of this year. And so, there are a couple of reasons why China has reached a manufacturing critical mass. Right. And so whereas in the US, we're talking about gigawatt hours, in China, we're talking about terawatt hours at this point. There are 37 cell suppliers. There are very few cell suppliers left in the US, 300 EV makers in China, and they're all innovating at a very rapid rate. Second reason is that the charging infrastructure has hit an inflection point in China. China has 3 times more public high-power charging points than filling stations at this point. I think US is less than 20%. So, and there's nothing that ruins a trip more than a broken charger in the US market. And third, I think it's very interesting to observe the low-end disruption that's happening in China. At one point, Elon Musk laughed at BYD, but they've become an EV powerhouse. And Kathy Wood has laughed at or called the Wuling Mini EV, which is a small micro vehicle that costs around $5,000 and goes about 300 kilometers. She originally called that a golf cart, but within 3 months that surpassed sales of the Model 3 in China. And I think they're selling either 3-to-1 or 5-to-1 in terms of ratio as compared to the Model 3 in China, so quickly surpassing their volume. And so I think there's just a lot of learnings to observe between the two countries, and there are a lot of collaboration opportunities if you want to move this forward to get to a 90 or 100% EVs in the next decade.
Thanks, Alfred. Did you actually say that 20% of Chinese vehicles are now EVs?
Yeah, as of this year, probably the second half of this year, we've reached about 20% penetration. I think the US is still around 2% penetration. So the market is just quite a bit more advanced in the China market as of current.
One other question for Iris. So Iris, you had mentioned there was that there was a test. I think did you say Guangzhou has a test pilot project right now? Can you explain or talk a little bit about that? Because Americans don't so often go in for pilot projects. We tend to, produce the regulations, and it seems to have been effective. But can you tell us a little bit more about these pilot projects in Guangzhou?
Yeah, sure. And just before I jump into that topic, I want to add a little bit more on top of Alfred's comment. Yes, so China's EV penetration is probably around 20% at this as of right now. But then the goal for the overall country level, according to the recent new energy vehicle development plan published by the State Council, is to achieve about 50% of the penetration by the end of 2035. So really is doing everything that we can to penetrate as many EV as possible. Like I said, it's specific in different cities. You can see this initiative to be expanded even more. Like I said earlier, by end of 2022, all the taxis in Guangzhou will be replaced by the electrical taxis. So just a little bit comment on that, and just going back to the question that you had. Yes, so I feel like also to echo on Alfred's point that US has always, in the past few years, US has always been the pioneer in terms of launching the regulations or launching the deployment plan for the new technology. But not right now, as you can see that the China, especially the local government is catching up with this regulation, because we know that either for EV or for AV, the most critical component to promote the development of this new technology is the sufficiency of the local regulation. Because, for example, for AV, if you don't have an authorized driving testing license from the government, there is never a chance that there is never possible for you to literally operate your vehicle on road. So we rely, especially our autonomous driving industry, we rely heavily on the city or on the local government to publish the reasonable and proactive regulations to help us promote and test and improve our technology. Like I said earlier, so the city, not only, especially for Guangzhou, not only that we have, the city has published a bunch of the regulations for the regulations to guarantee, to authorize the driver license for the autonomous vehicle companies who are going to have the safety drivers in the vehicle in 2019. But starting from 2020, they took this step a little bit more, a step forward, meaning that they were able to authorize the autonomous driving technology companies who are comfortable enough about their technology to remove the safety driver completely from the vehicle. That's why they have this called driverless testing permit. Guangzhou was definitely the first city who invented or figured out the whole regulations about the driverless autonomous vehicles and issued the license to the qualified companies. And also recently, the city government has also researched a bunch of the technology advancement and published this regulations about mixing the autonomous vehicles along with all this regular human driver vehicles, and make sure that these two type of the species can work together, or can work together with each other very well on the road. And they have published this iterative plan, and also have published the detailed regulations about what if there is an accident, right? What if there is some like unexpected situation, how the city would respond to this unexpected regulations and or unpredicted cases when deploying this AVs on the road. And they're taking this iterative approach firstly deploying this series of the regulations in one trial district. This is a district where a lot of autonomous driving technology companies in China are doing their road testing and gradually they will further polish the regulation about this mixed or shared road management, and then further deploy into all the rest of the district, and aiming to be able to have the autonomous driving vehicles running freely with all the other driverless vehicles in everywhere in Guangzhou City by the 2030. It's very important because we know that even though we want to make this autonomous driving happen, but then due to this like technology limitation and so on and so forth, we definitely will expect at least a decade until before we see all the vehicles to be replaced by the driverless or by the autonomous vehicles. So there will be a long time in the near future that we will see the mixture of autonomous vehicle along with the human driver vehicles on the road. So how to regulate this kind of mixed situation was definitely a big question for any city or any local government. But luckily that Guangzhou City, they decided to take this initiative and start this trial program. I'm sure that many more cities in China will follow Guangzhou's initiatives.
Thank you. So Maureen or Lowell, is this idea the possibility of pilot projects? Is that something that we could do here in California, or is that, I mean, that there's a bit of liability here. It strikes me to have a bunch of autonomous vehicles running around, you know, and I know that this conversation is mostly about electric vehicles, but it strikes me that, you know, you wouldn't want to just take a neighborhood in San Francisco and say it's, you know, anybody with an autonomous vehicle can ride it around. So is there anything like this happening?
I know that Cruise and Waymo, you know, are all over the hills of San Francisco, but they are full of engineers and technicians. My daughter actually works in the autonomous vehicle sector, and most of the pilots that I understand are outside of California, in Arizona, and I believe Las Vegas. I haven't kept up with where they're actually letting human beings get into these vehicles. I know that there's many layers of regulatory approval that these companies have to get through and pass before that they're going to put humans in them. And Lowell, you may know a lot more than I do since you work really closely with these companies.
Thanks, Maureen. Yeah, so we are in regular check-ins with Cruise, particularly because they are really dedicated to the electric future, and so we are in discussion with them around the charging infrastructure. But in terms of, Bruce, to your question about the vehicle themselves, I think the California Department of Motor Vehicle has a pretty robust set of regulations, like Maureen said, that have certain there are different criteria for testing with a safety driver. There are criteria that the company, the vehicle and technology have to meet for full driverless testing. And then there's also, I believe, a third tranche of regulatory regulations that speak towards deployment. I'm not sure if there's any company in San Francisco that's reached that deployment stage yet, but as Maureen mentioned, Waymo and Cruise and others are testing with a safety driver in the streets of San Francisco today.
Interesting. So then another question for, and actually it strikes me it's the same question, but a slightly different approach. So Maureen and to some degree Lowell again, one of the questions about electric vehicles, and the New York Times covered this a few months ago, is this issue about whether or not the infrastructure would support the increased charging, because as you bring more electric vehicles on board, you also start to put a strain on especially in a place like California, which has to a large degree uses hydropower. You start to put a strain on the electrical grid. In China, a similar question for Iris is, I haven't heard too many problems about the electrical grid in China, except for the fact that so much of it is based on pretty dirty coal. And so you might be driving an electric vehicle in China, but the charging that goes into it is based on a coal-based coal plants. So my question here is kind of twofold. One is for Maureen and for Lowell is, do we have the grid that will support these vehicles of the future? And for Iris, is there a way to integrate cleaner electrical, a cleaner electrical grid into the charging units for the vehicles? Maybe Maureen should go first.
Well, I would say no, we don't have the grid to support the future. And I think that is a huge concern. I think, in our work in California, we really talk mostly about just the clean energy mix, and that, when you buy an EV, you can, you're really driving the majority of your fuel as renewable. What's interesting is we are seeing, states in the Midwest that are wind and solar powered, really turning to electric vehicles and EV education and outreach programs, because they realize that electricity is the new fuel, and their grid is clean. So will our grid sustain it? I think that is the topic of a lot of conversation and investment. And I will hand that tough question off to Lowell.
Thanks, Maureen. No, it's indeed really tough questions, and I'm glad there are many, many smart people working on it. I think, from my perspective, I think there are a lot of electrons out there, but are there enough wires to carry the electrons from generation to distribution to the vehicle? So to answer that question, recently the Department of the Environment collaborated with the International Council on Clean Transportation to project what the charging infrastructure need looks like from 2025 to 2050. So the council, International Council on Clean Transportation, ICCT, built us two scenarios. One scenario is, look, you, San Francisco, stay business as usual. You don't do anything, but just keep doing what you're doing. You do you. And, this is the amount of power you need to publicly charge all the electric vehicles that's registered in San Francisco by 2030. The next scenario ICCT proposes, you do 3 intervention policies. And when you do these 3 intervention policies, you could reduce your charging need in megawatt hour by up to 63%. So those policies that we're recommending, and they are mode shift, so public transportation, walking, biking, whenever possible. Intervention number 2 is congestion pricing for downtown corridors. And intervention number 3 is implement a strategic curbside charging network, level 2. So by doing all 3 intervention policy, you could reduce your charging demand by 2030 up to 63%. That's remarkable. So if we're able to do that, that means we are relieving of the charging of the grid investment that's going to be needed to support what the charging looks like in San Francisco in the future. So I think to more fully answer the question, we could have a scenario where we are reducing the charging demand by implementing these 3 policies as recommended by ICCT.
So Iris, as David, and I'm not sure which David, there's several, has pointed out, there were some big rolling blackouts in China a few weeks ago. But a critical question is that I think, increasing the number of EVs is going to really not matter as much as it could if you don't find yourself with, a cleaner electrical grid. So I'm not sure, I recognize you're not an expert on China's electrical grid, but nonetheless, it should be factoring a bit into your calculations. And can you give us a little bit of a background on that?
Sure. Yeah, that's a really great question. Thanks, Bruce. And then in order to answer that question, I would like to start from the top. So let's just take a look at the country level of the carbon emission goal for China. So recently, the State Council released our carbon emission goal that China needs to achieve that, which means that we, as a whole country, we will have to achieve the carbon peak by 2030 and eventually the carbon neutrality by 2060. And this is a country level goal in terms of the new energy and clean energy moving forward. And then each department will have to develop their own plan in order to achieve that dual carbon goal released by the State Council. So to answer your question, the Transportation Department specifically published the development for the new energy vehicle, the 5-year plan from the 5-year plan moving forward. And they did a little bit more breakdown on each process of launching and deploying the electrical vehicle. In terms of the raw materials, they have the different branches. I quickly skimmed through the whole policy regulations book. They had them broken down into the raw material manufacturing, the electrical vehicle manufacturing process, and also the deployment process. So on each stage of the electrical vehicle deployment, the government actually has corresponding regulations so that in overall, we as a country, we can achieve the carbon emission goal by 2030 and 2060. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. So Alfred, as somebody who thinks about this in probably a very holistic fashion, can you give us any comments on this? And I also have other questions for you coming up, but what would your perspective be on this?
Yeah, thank you, Bruce. Just one observation is that the energy mix in the U.S. Compared to China is that U.S. is still quite heavy on coal. I think 50% or so, and 20% nuclear, and China is roughly 70% coal, maybe 1% or so nuclear, and U.S. has not built nuclear power plants since the 80s, and there are movements to decommission many of these plants, while China is rapidly building up their nuclear energy mix, and has a target to get to 10% and possibly 20% over time, and so I think that contributes to decarbonization to a certain extent. Maybe not a popular solution from a Western perspective, but does achieve some of these goals, and something that the U.S. perhaps needs to consider over time, which is if we don't implement, if we're decommissioning our nuclear power, where is the remaining energy mix going to come from if we don't want it to come from fossil fuels, right? So. And the other consideration is that China is the largest producer of solar and a very large producer of wind energy, right? And so the missing component is energy storage, and the batteries being used in China are majority iron phosphate batteries compared to what we mostly use in the U.S. are ternary batteries, NCA, NCM batteries, because we need the longer range. Partly because we don't have high-speed rail in the U.S., so we need cars that have a longer range. I think typical Chinese driver might drive 30 miles per day, and 100-mile range vehicles very much sufficient, because very few people would go outside of their city via personal car. They would typically take high-speed rail, and so this is another consideration. Because the Chinese market are using more iron phosphate batteries, these batteries typically have a double, if not triple, the cycle life of ternary batteries. So possibly 4,000, 6,000 cycles. And so there is a on the roadmap of many companies battery cycling or second life, they call it, where these vehicle batteries, after say 10 years of life, can be still used for another 10 or 20 years for energy storage at the home or for distributed grids and so on and so forth. Whereas I think the batteries that we use in the US are probably good for roughly 10 years or about 1,500, 2,000 cycles, and probably need to be fully recycled in terms of having the components decomposed and rebuilt. So it's just another consideration. I think this is a more complicated topic, but on the high level, as Iris said, China is very committed to peak carbon by 2030. There are many strategies that they've deployed that are aggressively pushing to reach these targets, and by carbon neutrality by 2060. I think these are very serious goals that the Chinese government is pursuing very aggressively. And I think the U.S. needs to think about, how do we reach some of these goals in our home market, and especially without nuclear. So
interesting. Okay, so I would like to try a bit of an exercise. And I think Alfred is, as somebody who's invested in these technologies and kind of, again, has to peer ahead. I'd like you to give Alfred, if you could, a bit of an overview as to where you think the growth is going to occur, but also what you need to see to make this the kind of investment that makes sense. And then I want to reverse engineer this conversation and ask Lowell, Iris, and Maureen to comment on what we need to get to that place, because I already see massive differences between the Chinese system and the American system, and this has actually only highlighted this even more. And I think the question here is, how do we get to this point where these investments make sense and where you can count on that stable policy environment that Maureen mentioned is so important to the future process? So if you could give us a brief overview, Alfred, of where you think all this should go, kind of the ideal scenario, and then we can go back to our other three discussants and see how they get there. Nothing like putting you on the spot, huh?
Yeah, no worries. I think Elon gave us a very good clue about how to think about this when he said or tweeted, prototypes are easy, but production is hard. I think cash flow positive is excruciating. This is not an easy business to be in, and getting to production, given the environment, the U.S. environment, which has kind of outsourced a lot of their manufacturing capabilities for many decades, is not an easy task. And so, very much anything in this space, I really believe in this partnership between the U.S. and China, and especially because China has a lot of the production expertise and accumulated capabilities at this point. And so China, furthermore, because they're thinking in terms of terawatt hours, not gigawatt hours, they're going to have a scale advantage here. And so, in a sense, we need to tap into that, that large scale to be competitive. So that's I think one thing to consider. But I think the other is that what China has done well is this kind of public policy and private enterprise partnership. And China really learned very attentively from the California market, from the California Air Resource Board, on how to jumpstart this industry, right? And so the ZEV credits, the CAFE standards that California did early on, you really helped jumpstart the market, and scale drives parity. And once we get to, when I say parity, I mean cost parity. So once we got to scale, we were able to reach sub $100 per kilowatt hours on the battery packs, which brings electric vehicles to cost parity to a equivalent internal combustion engine vehicle. And once the market got to parity, then market forces could take over, right? And so we see this now with Tesla, which they're not really in favor of these subsidies because now they've gotten to a certain scale, and their products are at parity with the market, so they can just drive on market forces. But we need that jumpstart for the rest of the industry, and especially the charging infrastructure. So there's a lot of help that needs to be provided from the policy side, and there needs to be a good collaboration between public policy and private for this to work to get to scale.
So Lowell, are any of those points that Alfred made, are they in the works?
Yeah, I think from a local government perspective, definitely heard Alfred loud and clear. Our goal is, to develop policies that are friendly to, again, to spur charging investments in San Francisco. So what does that mean exactly? That means, for us, we got to cut the red tape. We got to give the market a signal that San Francisco is a place that's not only friendly to electric vehicle ownership, but it's friendly to everyone having an opportunity to own an electric vehicle, because we have a convenient, affordable, safe, ubiquitous public charging infrastructure network. So to that end, Bruce, San Francisco has done a lot to effectuate policies that give that signal. One is, in January, San Francisco was recognized by the governor's office as a gold medal electric vehicle permitting city. What that means is San Francisco has a electric vehicle charging permitting streamlined checklist. Over the counter, anyone who would like to have electric charger level 2 at home can easily apply for one online. Now we're working on planning codes. We're tweaking the planning codes, again, to make the development, the new construction, or the conversion of previous automotive uses like parking lots and gas stations into an electric vehicle charging location, make it a lot easier for those projects to go through. All of that to send a signal, again, to the market that San Francisco is supportive of EVs for everyone.
Actually, I'd like to turn now to Maureen a little bit. And Maureen, so we've had a lot of these ideas out there. Where do you see this going? You have Alfred kind of from a kind of private investment point of view, which admittedly has public policy implications. But where would you see, as somebody who's really facilitated the growth of those charging stations that Lowell's talked about, where would you see those? How would you see that sort of policy environment leading to that kind of nirvana of, ubiquitous EVs everywhere?
Well, we come at it from the consumer point of view, which is where we spend most of our time. And it is breathtaking to hear the numbers from China as far as cars and scalability and just how quick you guys are to market. It's just mind-boggling. From our point of view, consumer behavior is really what we see as the difference here. A car purchase is personal. It's almost a rite of passage for people here and across the country, and it's not a fast decision. So we've been in the business of educating not only about cars and pricing and all of that, but the fuel and the charging. And the bottom line is that they see gas stations, but they don't see charging stations. And they can drive from one end of the state to the other, and they will, unless you're in a Tesla, you very rarely come across highly visible banks of chargers. You have to find them on an app. It's very difficult. And this is front and center, I think, with what we're seeing coming out of the state as far as investing in charging infrastructure. But it is hard to find. It is not maintained. And I think, as Alfred said, running out of a charge, and we hear this from consumers all the time, is not a fun experience. So I think the investment is coming. We're seeing and hearing that it's a top priority. We're seeing funds being spent, and a lot of it is going into communities, disadvantaged and underrepresented communities in California, where there is a charging desert, and the people live in multi-unit dwellings. They have no place to charge at home, so they are going to rely on workplace and public charging. The big debate is how much to invest in fast chargers versus getting people with electric outlets at home that they can plug in. I know the city of San Francisco has been really aggressive in the multi-unit dwelling aspect, so that everybody who lives in an apartment should be able to charge an EV with or without a garage. So these are some of the challenges that we're hearing out of Sacramento, and they are being addressed.
Iris, would you like to respond to this from a Chinese perspective?
Yeah, so I think this is a very interesting topic, and to me, standing from the China perspective, I think it's a little bit different because if you look at the economy in China, the government normally has a huge influence in terms of any implementation of any new technologies. With that being said, that the execution or the scalability of any new technology in China is amazing. Like, for example, if you wanted to replace all the vehicles from the traditional fuel vehicles with the new electrical vehicles, you can do that. It's not that easy, but then it's relatively easier to do that in China than in the other countries globally. But then I would say that for us, the most critical in China, the most critical question or the most critical challenge would be to consider the social impact, right? Since Chinese government, they have sort of this influence and impact, transition the new technology overnight. But then we have to think more carefully and considerately about the social impact and how the general public is accepting or is welcoming this new technology. For example, if the company or if the government is giving a lot of subsidies or giving a lot of favorable parking policies to the electric vehicle owners, what it would look like for the vehicle owners who are not ready to accept this EV concept, right? So I guess I think that for China, the situation is a little bit different. It's easier to implement the new technology and to transform to new technology. But then we need to put more thoughts in terms of the social impact and how the general public is feeling about this transition.
Interesting. So I'd like to turn now to the role of public-private partnerships, P3s or PPPs. And I think, Maureen, you would be a perfect place to start this conversation. I want to see about what are the opportunities to invest here in California, and then also potentially in Guangzhou if you're from California. And so I'm going to ask everybody this question. So Maureen, would you start?
Can you be a little more specific, Bruce, on investing in anything or?
Well, no, you know, I'm thinking about in terms of like technology and infrastructure. I mean, a lot of this is going to be a sunk cost. Clearly, the federal government and the U.S. government, or sorry, the California state government and the city are going to have to make and they have made major commitments. You referenced that in your opening remarks. Mm-hmm. But as the technology emerges, clearly a lot of it's driven. One of the points that Alfred made was that there's a lot of kind of low-level innovation going on in China right now. And so a lot of this, it should provide an opportunity for investors to potentially participate in this so that you create this environment where you can count on government funding for part of it, but not all of it. And I'm kind of curious where you would see opportunities. Say I'm in China, where would I want to invest? What would be an opportunity to invest and feel fairly secure about it?
Well, first of all, I would love to see more Chinese vehicles on the California commercial car market. I don't know if that's even possible, but when we started in 2012, China had 2 commercial vehicles. I'm not sure if they were compliance vehicles, but they were wonderful, and then they disappeared. So if China can get a car into California and make it a car that consumers want, I think that would be a great investment. I think infrastructure, charging is a huge hurdle. We have, a handful of companies, mostly because they were either sued by the state of California but EVgo and Electrify America are the two large charging companies, and we can do better. So I think if China can bring its muscle and technology into that space, that is really would be a huge lift. But charging is a huge hole, I think.
Lowell, do you want to respond to this?
Yeah, Bruce, Maureen, I agree with you. You know, Electrify America, EVgo, ChargePoint, those are the typical, not typical, the major players in the charging spaces. So in order, you know, what is the Department of the Environment and State of San Francisco have up their sleeves to drive more of the public-private partnership? I think one of our major initiatives that we are going to embark on this year is work with the state of California, in particular the California Energy Commission, the CEC, because the CEC has a pot of money called the California Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Project, and shorthand is Cal EVIP. This CEC program addresses like the regional needs for EV charging infrastructure throughout California. So more locally, Alameda County has applied for the Cal EVIP funding and got it. And the purpose of this Cal EVIP program is to establish the public-private partnership, right? So the state working with the local government will provide a match funding for any private investments that are made locally. So for example, throughout the 4 years of this Cal EVIP project, the state has contributed, with support from local government, $149 million. And the private sector has contributed $36 million. So I think it's a great opportunity. San Francisco is going to apply for it. It will become a great opportunity to invite charging providers into San Francisco to develop projects locally through the Cal EVIP program.
Alfred, this is an area that you probably have had a lot of experience in, and I'm kind of curious what your approach would be here.
Yeah, thank you, Bruce. Well, for the charging infrastructure side, I'll leave it to the experts. I think Maureen, and folks have covered it. The frustrations, as well as sort of the procedures or the process to get the government aligned and implementing a broad-based charging network that. China is basically 3 to 1, right, in terms of high-speed charging to gas filling stations. Do we need to get to that level? I'm not sure, but we certainly need to do a lot better. And how do we do that given the difficulties in terms of the operations of, say, PG&E, who have trouble even managing forest fires at this point and have very little visibility of their own assets, right? So how do we upgrade them into a world-class charging infrastructure? I'm not sure. So something definitely needs to be done on that side. For the vehicles itself, I'm very optimistic that we will see Chinese vehicles coming to the U.S. market in the near future. And if not the vehicles, at least the supply chain will support American vehicles, but with many Chinese manufactured components, including battery packs and systems, motors, etc. So if we look at the trend, a little over a decade ago, I think when I started looking at EVs, the cost per kilowatt hour for a battery plus a pack was over $1,000. And now we're probably close to 150 or so in the U.S. markets, under $90 in the China markets, and so $100 is sort of the goal for the industry in terms of reaching parity to internal combustion engine vehicles. But the costs are going to continue to scale down as we get more scale and volume, right? We're still in the early phases I mean, 7 million vehicles this year out of 90. You know, we're less than 10% of the penetration, the total penetration of passenger vehicles, and I'm not even accounting for you know, trucks and buses and so on and so forth. And so as this industry scales, you know, we're likely to see battery prices you know, cut in half, right? And so if the battery is maybe a third of the cost of a vehicle, and that cost component cuts in half again in the coming years, then we're going to see electric vehicles that are going to be more cost competitive than gas cars, right? Possibly, you know, the typical car, the equivalent EV might be $3,000 to $5,000 cheaper in the coming decade. And so we're going to get to a point where, you know, can gas cars survive without subsidy, right? We're going to get to that, you know, possibly down to that point. And so I think the hockey stick of adoption is really going to continue to accelerate at that point. And so it's going to be very exciting to see. But I think the limiting factor will be charging, right? Because you know, I think, you know, we talked about, you know, 10% of garages having EV charging. You know, that works with the penetration we have today. But imagine if EVs, you know, increase 10 times or 20 times. You know, there literally will not be enough charging spots, and so who wants to wait in a long line or queue up or be stranded because they can't, you know, their cars run out of power, right? And so I kind of see this akin to the mobile phone industry. I mean, we're very excited by the latest iPhone and so forth, but I would say over 90% of the investment is in the network, right? So it really doesn't matter if you have, you know, the latest iPhone, if we're still on 2G, right? And I think that's how it feels in the US at this point. And so if we don't really invest in our infrastructure, then we're going to be, even though California was the pioneer in electric vehicles, we're likely to be the furthest behind from a global market perspective.
So actually, I want to ask Iris for her comments, but first, before I do that, I'd like to know, like you all know, that if you want to ask any questions, just put them in the Q&A. I'm happy to incorporate those into the discussion. We're down to about 15 minutes or so. And before I do that too, actually, I wanted to follow up a little bit on this. So, you know, it strikes me that China and the US actually are really in many ways very different. You have in China the ability to scale. It sounds like you have a pretty sufficient number of chargers. You also have a solid infrastructure of high-speed rail, which actually creates this opportunity for smaller car companies with more limited range and less expensive vehicles to do very well. US, on the other hand, you know, many of the innovations that started, you know, came here. It does strike me that one area that everybody's highlighted, Lowell, Alfred, and Maureen, is that the real Achilles heel in California is the lack of chargers. And one interesting thing too is if I'm thinking about buying a Tesla, but I work, you know, in another part of the state, you know, the I-5 corridor, you know, San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego are going to have plenty of chargers. But if you go inland to these Central California cities like Fresno or Bakersfield or Stockton, you might find yourself suddenly in a bit more difficult terrain. So that strikes me as one of the areas that and it sounds from what Lowell said, is that there are in fact, you know, opportunities there for, you know, kind of that there is money, that the state is aware of. Maureen has pointed out the social environmental justice elements of this. So it sounds like in a variety of ways the state is trying to address this, but it also sounds like there's a long ways to go. And I'm going to come back to this in a second, but before I did, I wanted to give Iris a chance because we focused heavily on California and its needs. But how do you see China fitting in both to the California market and then also to where it goes into China? And I actually have one first question to ask you, Iris, which is WeRide actually profitable?
That's a very interesting question. So yeah, so we're currently not profitable. We have revenue streams from different operations of running our autonomous driving fleet, but we're not right now aiming towards becoming profitable. That's not our now. We have great investors who understand this whole great vision of this autonomous driving technology, and they know that it will take several years to develop the technology and achieve the mass deployment. So the investors, our investors, are actually very patient with us. So we got great funding from the investor, and we have a very clear roadmap in terms of achieving the massive commercialization in the near and the middle and in the long term. Yeah, so that's to answer your first question, and then the second question also to echo on your earlier question, when to invest in California, right? So for us as a Chinese company, we did invest in California, right? We had our one of our largest R&D center located in San Jose as well. So by the time we made this decision of developing the site office or bringing our technology or products to a new international market, we'll definitely consider the market potential, and also we'll consider the local government compliance, right? How we can comply with the local regulations. And thirdly, we'll consider about the fundamental readiness of the infrastructure that our industry will be needing. So I know that for the EV companies, that fundamental infrastructure will be the charging stations. But for our AV industry, the situation is a little bit different. For the infrastructure, we will probably be talking about the telecommunication infrastructure. For example, there is one of the very important development stage in the autonomous driving development is the remote control stage, where we remove all the safety driver from the vehicle, but we are remotely monitoring them from our remote center. In order to do that monitoring, we will rely heavily on the telecommunications. And previously, everybody was telecommunication. And starting from 2020, our company in China has migrated into the 5G telecommunication, and it has been working very well. But in the R&D office, in our California R&D office today, we're still using the 4G telecommunication approach. The reason is we assessed and had the results showing that the coverage, the telecommunication coverage and the signal performance for the 5G in the US was just not ready for the massive deployment of autonomous driving. So you can see, so that's a very simple or straightforward example, but then you can also see that how the infrastructure readiness can affect the investment or the operations for any new technology company.
Great. So we do have a question, and it is actually an interesting question. Are there any energy security issues, real or perceived, between the two countries or from one to another? And maybe Alfred, you should take a shot at that question.
Thanks, Bruce.
You're welcome.
Very complicated question, right? I mean, it's a lot of these probably beyond my pay grade, but I will make an observation, which is, you know, the current administration, the government, and perhaps prior, is, you know, I mean, I guess the current administration is really constraining investment in fossil fuels, and the prior administration seemed to really constrain investment into renewables, and so there's a concern that you know, if we're not investing in both, then I think, you know, we're really putting the the nation in a very vulnerable state, last thing we want to do is be orphaned in terms of energy resources and energy independence, and really be dependent on other countries for all of these technologies. And so, I think while our country has very much focused on a fossil fuel based economy and investment for multiple decades, China has really invested forward into the electrical and renewable energy resources and supply chains and materials and so on and so forth. And so I think we're a little bit late to the game for a lot of these things, even though a lot of the innovations did come from the U.S. And so I think there needs to be a very strong effort to push forward. But I think, practically speaking, I think deeper partnerships with companies and that have a strong that have spent decades to build out these energy infrastructures are probably more likely. I mean, one example of a breakout success in China has been CATL, right? This company, was a kind of spin out from ATL to focus on EV batteries, kind of a newcomer. I think probably either came around or after, when A123 started in the U.S. But A123 really didn't get the support that they needed from the U.S. Governments, while CATL, probably in a weaker start, less technology base, had a lot of support from the Chinese government, and now they've become the largest battery producer in the world. I think in China, they've become the #2 largest market cap company, surpassing ICBC. I think, they're just behind Multi Liquor in terms of market cap size. And the founder is now more wealthy than Jack Ma. But it's just an amazing story about just focus and persistence and really good, private-public partnership to enable, a company that's critical for the EV industry. So, I don't have a good answer for you, Bruce, but just some observations, kind of following the market.
Actually, I thought that last assessment was actually very interesting and well worth hearing. Iris, from your perspective, are there any security issues that need to be addressed?
Yes. So again, I'm representing from the EV industry, so not too much comment on the EV industry. But from the EV industry, yes, there is definitely some of the security issues that we have to consider it, especially that we're collecting a lot of the critical transportation or the critical mobility data from the generic public when we're doing this road testing. And then we're also having the operations in California as well. The data security is more critical in the EV industry for us. So the good thing is the Chinese company, they have published a series of the regulations talking about how to secure the data privacy, or how to secure the data privacy, and how to secure the privacy for our on-road testing. And I believe that there are going to be more serious regulations coming up in the US as well. But just to be said that our company, since we're operating and with this sensitive data in both countries, we have definitely two separate teams to handle the road testing and handle this like big data from these two different markets. But data security is definitely one of our top challenges or the top topics in the autonomous vehicle industry. Interesting.
All right, so it's time to start wrapping up, and it's time for kind of last thoughts. So Lowell, what anything in the past that's come up that you'd like to sort of wrap it up? with a final comment.
Thanks, Bruce, and thank you, GlobalSF, for inviting the Department of the Environment, myself, to participate in the panels. I think the final thought is we San Francisco needs to have a robust public charging infrastructure by 2030, and that we certainly welcome all of the investments that are being contemplated into San Francisco. We are developing policies that really spur these investments, and if there are any questions or any kind of concerns, or I'm open. Let's talk. And that again, thank you for the opportunity to participate in this wonderful activity.
Awesome.
Back to you, Bruce.
Sorry, Iris, any last thoughts?
Yeah, so again, I think this is a great discussion. I'm so glad to have this opportunity to explore, the differences between ramping up the new technology in the US as well as in China. So thank you so much again for inviting me and having this very thoughtful discussion.
Terrific. Alfred, any final thoughts you've got on where this conversation has gone and where we're going to go?
I'll just make one more comment, which is that it's very easy to say or look at the success in China and say, wow, why couldn't we have done this? Or this is the model to follow. The market in China for the past decade didn't develop without its hiccups. And so I would say just a couple of observations about private-public partnering. Good policy can really accelerate the market in a significant manner, but bad policy can also hurt the market. And so I think these policies can be very heavy-handed, and China had periods of retraction where the market there's confusion and difficulty in the market and a lot of bloodshed, and because of policy that wasn't well thought out as well. And so I think we have to be very careful about how we craft these policies. Not any policy is better than no policy. I think that's not the right line of thinking. It's got to be well thought out and kind of ultimately be handed. The goal of it has to be to get to scale and then to let the market forces take over. I think that's important. And the second is that these policies, energy policies, have to be very long-term oriented. And I think one of the problems we face in the U.S. is that because there's so many, the divide is so strong between the different parties, and then different administrations want to basically kill off prior projects and be able to push new ones, that these starts and stops can be very harmful to the whole environment and companies. And so I think we have to think hard about how do we, if a policy makes sense, and how do we make sure that we insulate it somewhat to the political wax and wanes or changes that ultimately are happening here. And so there needs to be very much a long-term focus. And I think that's one thing that China has done right, which is very much a long-term sustained focus to enable these things happen. The EV sector, they've been supporting it for 10, 15 years, right? How could we get support for policy that can last in the decades without these kind of changes because of political sentiment? So it's just a general question.
That's a good question. Maureen, you started us off, and I'd like it if you conclude with any final thoughts drawing all these pieces together.
Well, thank you, Bruce, and thank you to my fellow panelists. It's been a wonderful hour and a half here. Yeah, I'll close with a comment that then Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger made 2 decades ago when he spoke to a group of clean tech executives in Silicon Valley. And he said, look, if California doesn't invest in infrastructure and clean technology and high-speed rail, China is going to eat our lunch. And everybody scoffed and thought, you know, we're Silicon Valley, we've got this. But I think we need China, especially in the EV sector. The might and strength of what you bring is critical to all of us really achieving our goals. And after all, it is about sustainability and moving people off of fossil fuels to cleaner forms of transportation. So bring it on.
That's a great way to close. Thank you all for your participation. And I'm going to turn it over to Darlene Chu Bryant, my friend and the director of GlobalSF.
And thank you. Let me see. And thank you so much, Bruce, for moderating such a informative panel. I totally enjoyed it, and I'm sure all of you did. So thank you for joining today's program on connecting the dots on electric vehicles and sustainability. And you heard it here. The government, whether local or state, was instrumental in providing the support to kickstart the industry towards commercialization until parity was reached or will be reached in the marketplace, which we're starting to see now. And it is here in San Francisco that we continue to support and work with the private sector to build out the infrastructure to enable a truly electrical vehicle transportation network. What I hear is to complement the EV market, California needs to build out our high-speed rail. And it is happening. We've seen it firsthand here in Bakersfield, down in Southern California. So in the not so distant future, the train will arrive in San Francisco's Transbay Terminal. I appreciate our speakers, Mr. Mark Chandler from the City of San Francisco for joining us, to Maureen Blanc, Alfred Chu, Lowell Chu, Iris Chui for sharing their perspective and expertise, and to our amazing moderator, Dr. Pickering, and also to Judy Lee, and today's sponsor, One Lin Capital and the City of Guangzhou. We welcome you to explore opportunities in San Francisco, starting with San Francisco and then in the Greater Bay Area, of course. Contact us at chinasf@globalsf.biz and see how we can support you and your efforts and help you connect the dots, whether it be finding partners here locally or navigating the system. I'm happy to let you know that all this information that you just heard is being recorded. This webinar will be available on our website, globalsf.biz, as well as chinasf.org. Please sign up for our newsletter and receive notifications of future events and programs at info@globalsf.biz or chinasf@globalsf.biz. And with that, I thank you all for joining us and have a great day.